I really can't. I have
Okay.
Does it actually work?
So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. I am delighted to introduce our speaker for the series. Her name is Dr. Angela Boatman. Angela holds a PhD in higher education from EDD, that's the way they call it in Harvard, from Harvard University, and she also had an MPT and a master's in higher education from the University of Michigan. After Harvard, she did a postdoc at the Center for Education and Policy Analysis at Stanford University. She's a quantitative researcher, and her work focuses on evaluation of college access and completion policies, in particular issues related to remediation, financial aid, community colleges, and most recently, post-secondary instruction and course delivery. She has been doing really interesting work that I have been following closely on developmental education in Tennessee, and most recently with the support from the Lumina Foundation, she's exploring with some of her colleagues principles of behavioral economics, how they can better inform the design and the delivery of federal student aid programs. So I see in the audience some of you that have interest in higher education, so she's also has addressed these issues. She teaches courses in economics of higher education, management of college and university, and public policy issues, and she's at Vanderbilt University. And welcome, we're very excited to have you here.
Hi, thanks. Well, thank you very much for being here. I'm really happy to be here. I have to tell you that it took moving to Tennessee to learn that USC does not always mean University of Southern California. It also means the University of South Carolina, which I did not know, and I had to tell you that I spent 9 months of last year talking to our IT guy whose wife had gotten a job at USC, and they were going to move to USC. And we would have these conversations throughout these 9 months about like how jealous I was of the weather, and never, this went on forever without us knowing we're talking about totally different places. I would say things like, I wonder if you'll see celebrities there. He's thinking of South Carolina, and he's saying like, maybe, I mean, I guess I could see celebrities there. So that, it turns out that is a cultural difference. If I say USC in Tennessee, it does not mean University of Southern California. It did to me, it did to me. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about work that's going on in Tennessee around remediation and developmental education. I'm in the perfect place to do this because some of my sort of thought leaders in this field are here at USC. So I'm really happy to talk about this work and hope to get some feedback from some of the folks here that do similar kinds of work. So the outline for today, I'm going to talk about efforts to accelerate remediation in Tennessee, and I'm going to talk about it in sort of two ways. The first is from the side of the post-secondary institutions, and the second is from the side of the high schools. The high schools is work that's ongoing and sort of under development right now, and it's pretty interesting and receiving a lot of attention nationally as a program that other states are kind of looking to when they think about how to start handling this issue of college remediation at the high school level. So I'm going to try to focus a bit more of my time on that today. But I am going to start by sort of contextualizing this in the 4-year and 2-year college sector to start. And then at the end, I really want to talk just very briefly about some of this part of a big project that we're getting started on in Tennessee. It's sort of my hook so that like in 2 years you can invite me back and I can tell you all about what I learned in this big project that we're just getting started on. It's a statewide evaluation of this larger program. So I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So in terms of developmental education, I'm not going to sort of motivate this with what a big problem it is. My hope is that many of you understand this is a huge issue affecting colleges and also high schools in the United States. And so what I'm most interested in and have been for the last couple of years are efforts that colleges are undertaking to accelerate that pathway, to make it so that students spend less time in remediation. I come at that sort of agnostically. I don't know if that's the right idea or not, but I'm interested in kind of evaluating whether or not that's the right policy and for whom, which kinds of students. So we know from a lot of other good research that a major barrier here is the length of time that students have to spend in these classes. So colleges have responded by just shortening the amount of time students spend in these classes. There's been some very good work here from Frederick and others about the pathways through these programs and how we see that they can be very long and complicated and students don't often make it through them. So we see 4 in 10 students nationwide on average even fail to finish the sequence that they start. And there's been good work here that the low pass rates have often been due to the fact that students don't even attempt the classes. So there's this problem with having this kind of long string of remedial courses, and we see students not even enrolling in the classes that they're recommended for. So I think in the last couple of years, colleges have started to think a lot more about this. How can we take our entire sequence and put it in one course or put it in a summer program? And so they're making these kind of very dramatic changes, especially in Tennessee, where they're taking a 3-course sequence that would take a year and a half and shrinking it down to sometimes an 8-week module or a 1-semester course. So pretty dramatic changes in some of the colleges. Why this is important is we're obviously talking a lot about college completion these days. This has big implications for the group we might think is the very group we need to move the needle on. If we're going to talk about raising college graduation rates, this is the group that we want to be thinking about. These are the students most at risk of dropping out of colleges. And so if we want to kind of increase that graduation rate, this is the kind of work that we need to be thinking about, are these efforts to help them persist through college. So there's a lot of different ways that colleges have been trying to accelerate this pathway, this remedial experience for students. The first these are just kind of broad categories: contextualizing the remediation, so embedding it in some kind of other curriculum. We see this a lot in technical colleges and some community colleges. It's not necessarily its own course, it gets embedded into kind of another introductory course. That's very popular in Tennessee in their tech centers, where you're learning your math along with your technical automotive class, for example. A second is supplemental supports. There's a lot of good research these days about intensive advising or tutoring or offering things to students outside of the classroom that might help to speed up this process of remediation. And the third is accelerating students' progress. So this is actually like reducing the number of courses that students have to take, taking a course and dividing it up into smaller modules, and basically having students only complete a certain number of the modules, for example. But this question about co-requisite courses, this is a really interesting state policy initiative right now. We're seeing increasing numbers of states move to the elimination of remedial courses and instead are adopting this idea of a co-requisite model. So you still maybe, it's still maybe the case that you need remedial math, for example. We're just going to enroll you in college level math and offer you a separate outside tutoring section. And we see Tennessee is a state moving to this model. Other states have gone this route. They're eliminating remedial education as far as it exists on the books. And there's a lot of good research that could be done there, right, on whether the effects of this. We have some concerns about less so about the students maybe at the margins of needing remediation, a lot of unanswered questions about the really low scoring students here and whether asking them to move from what would be, several levels below college level to college level is the right approach for these students. There's, I think, some big unanswered questions still in that area. And then finally, the one I'm going to talk about a lot today is this idea of avoiding developmental education before it even begins, before students even get to college. So in many cases, we could probably assess students at some point in high school, you might even say middle school, and have some information about their likelihood of needing remediation in college. Can we then design policies to actually address that while they are still in compulsory schooling rather than waiting until they get to college? So that's what Tennessee has been looking at trying to do in the last, over the last couple of years. These are other things like summer bridge programs, dual enrollment programs, anything that would touch a student before they actually leave high school. I think and I would wonder if those of you in the room who know a lot about this would agree with me, I think we still don't have a clear picture of the benefits or consequences of accelerating students through these pathways. We have some sense that the students right around the cutoff, I think there's very good evidence that those students are doing just fine, if not better, as a result of eliminating their need to take a separate remediation course. We have a lot of evidence in math courses, for example. But again, this worry about students further down that distribution, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions there. As whole states move to systems like this, one might have some concerns or worries about what that means for the students who are really in pretty dire need of math skills and or reading or writing skills, particularly English language learning students and others. So there's been a lot of good research on remediation. I'm not going to go through all of it, but generally, like I said, we've seen some very good quasi-experimental studies using big state data or national data that have generally found that remediation on the whole doesn't seem to be helping these students to do better once they get into college level courses. There's been negative, if not negative to zero effects of these programs. This is work that was done several years ago and sort of helped set the stage for how it is that we might think, maybe this current system isn't the right system, let's start experimenting maybe with some other alternatives. And so from there, people started asking questions about, maybe it's working for some people and not for others. Maybe why we see null effects is that there are some people that really are benefiting from this and others who this is actually harming. So there have been some other good studies that have examined differences maybe by gender or by levels of academic preparation. There's a study out of this school it's an RD study looking at the LA community colleges that was looking at comparing those different courses so that you could actually look at how the lowest scoring students were doing as some of this work. So I think this is an important step towards the question we really want, which is like, who does this help and who doesn't this help? And then we also know quite a bit about the importance, we're learning more, I should say, about the importance of how these courses are designed. So there's some work here that is supporting the idea of class size might matter when it comes to remedial courses, or who's teaching the class. So we know that there's this we know just nationwide, this big rise in adjunct faculty. A lot of the colleges I work with in Tennessee are using the adjuncts primarily to teach the remedial courses. So we might have questions about if that's the optimal faculty distribution for some of these concerns. And we also know from some work Tatiana did about the faculty lack the technical expertise in the classroom to maybe be able to have this sort of nuanced approach to remediation, which becomes important when you're putting a lot of pressure onto the individual faculty members. Other questions or things that we want to know more about, a lot of programs in order to accelerate are relying heavily on technology. I'm working on a separate project in Tennessee right now that's looking at the intersection of technology and remedial education. A lot of colleges are leaning very heavily on technology to help them speed up the way they're teaching these courses. Please.
So are you talking about Alex, this type of softwares,
exactly.
Or something else?
Nope, that's great.
Oh, okay.
Mostly the software. So like Pearson's or Alex, this kind of emporium model where the students are at the computer the entire time and the teacher's walking around. Sort of a look at what impacts that's having. Yeah. And then, there are interesting other ways to use technology, certainly, but a lot of this does seem to be moving to, we know we need to accelerate this, let's rely heavily on technology to help us to do that. And then some people are talking about, if the Common Core does what it's intended to do, maybe this will help with the need for remediation in colleges. And so there is this, I think that'll be an interesting question to look at, is if this starts to shift over time as we move to some sort of a set of standards that may or may not align as closely with remedial needs. And then also some interesting, I'm going to talk a lot today about math. In fact, I'm going to talk exclusively about math. But Bill Tierney and Stephanie had done a lot of good work on writing. And I say that only because I was on a panel with Stephanie and was very interested in what they were finding when it comes to developmental writing as well. And they basically find similar things in math where there's this lack, writing's even a little bit, why it's harder to study is that it's harder to come up with a list of the skills one needs to sort of prepare for college level writing. But I think these are things important when I am going to talk about how Tennessee sort of went about designing a new program that was, that they then are trying to roll out across the state of Tennessee. So to give you a little bit of background from Tennessee, is anybody from Tennessee or has lived in Tennessee? Yes, Tennessee resident here. So just a little bit of background about it. There are very interesting things going on in education in Tennessee, which I think startled me when I first thought about that. But there are some very interesting things happening at the K-12 and at the higher ed level, very innovative. Tennessee's actually inside higher ed all the time these days. So it's an exciting place to be for somebody interested in these kinds of things. They're taking risks that I think you see a lot of states maybe not at least not in the higher ed sector. They're taking some big risks. Community college is free next year in Tennessee, right? So this is the big initiative rolling out in the state. All right, so in terms of the K-12 and higher ed sector, there's 318 high schools, there are 19 public colleges in Tennessee, and then there's the University of Tennessee system, which has a couple of campuses to it. The high schools, I'm going to focus on the seniors, because this is the group that they are focusing on in terms of remediation, whereas the higher ed sector, it's about 300,000 students across all of those colleges. In K-12, all students in Tennessee are being assigned to remediation from their 11th grade ACT test. So the ACT is it's mandatory in Tennessee. All 11th graders take the ACT. They are using the subtest of math to assign you to your remedial math course to determine if you need remediation or not. And there are about half of all students in the high schools, when they take the ACT math, are placing into what would be remediation when they get to college. So you get those scores in 11th grade. Prior to the program I'm going to talk about today, no matter what happened to you in 12th grade, no matter what you did or took in terms of math, you were going to take remediation in college if you went to college. So your score is what determined your placement, and that's still true today. At the college level, they are taking mostly your scores if you have them. That's their assignment instrument. However, if you are an adult with an ACT that's older than 5 years, or you just are coming from out of state and don't have an ACT, you take the Compass test. And there's pretty high levels of remedial needs at the colleges in Tennessee. Even more so higher at the two-year colleges, perhaps not surprising. But the takeaway here is high levels of remedial need when you use this instrument across the board. And then remediation in the colleges is offered in math, reading, and writing. And at the K-12 level, the program I'm going to talk about today is just currently in math. So they have basically taken a remedial program that was in the colleges and they've put it into the high schools. And that's only in the subject of math right now. They're talking about an English program that's going to look very, very similar, but for that work from Bill and Stephanie about how English is much harder to get people to agree on what that should look like, this is taking a while. This is a lot of conversations are happening about what that should look like. It's a lot harder to do than math, but that's under development. I'm just going to talk about math today. All of this is part of this big initiative in the state right now called Drive to 55, with the intention here of seeing this percent of working adults with post-secondary degrees increase to 55% by 2025. It's currently at 36%. 2025 is not that far away, actually, right? So this is a tall order, but there's a suite of programs that the state is looking at to try to get from 36 to 55%. These include the Tennessee Promise. This is the free community college. So maybe financial aid is the barrier. Maybe cost is why we don't see more people graduate. So let's make the two-year colleges free. That's one effort.
Angela, so does that make a big change in Tennessee? Because in California it would make basically no difference. So I just wanted to get a sense.
It's a great point. Yes, it will actually. So Tennessee is more expensive. On average, I would say the community college tuition is a couple $1,000s. Which for a lot of the families in Tennessee would be, we would imagine. A Pell Grant for many of these families would cover the cost of this, would cover the cost of community college, but one of the sort of impacts we're seeing of the Tennessee Promise is that it's encouraging kids to apply for the Pell Grant and fill out the FAFSA. So it's having these other effects, which basically means that the state's not going to cover them, the federal government is. But by this program, it has encouraged them to at least fill it out. So they saw really high. Tennessee had this dramatic jump in the number of students that filled out the FAFSA this year. It increased by about 18% because of this program. Because they were to participate in the Tennessee Promise. You are a current high school senior. You have to agree to go to college this fall of 2015, and you have to enroll full time, and you have a minimum GPA. But otherwise, there will be no tuition for attending community college. So that's their they've been getting a lot of attention around that. That's their big effort underway right now, is maybe cost is the problem. So we'll take cost out of it. They also have Tennessee Reconnect. This is for adults. So it's for adults attending the technical colleges, same idea. And then SAILS, which is the program I'm going to talk about today. This is a statewide initiative. It's funded by the governor's office, and it's an attempt to take the college remedial math course and put it into the senior year of high school and see if they take the exact same course and drop it into the high school instead of college, what will happen. And that's the research project I'm interested in. So any questions about this? I'm assuming many of you have heard about this. It's at least the two-year college, the free two-year college has had a lot of attention, including Obama mentioning it in the State of the Union. So, yeah, please.
Do you happen to know what the minimum GPA is for the Promise?
It's either I think it's 2.5. It could be as low as 2.0, but I feel like that sounds a little low. I think it's 2.5. Do you know?
I think it is 2.5.
Yeah.
And then the increase in FAFSA is also, what's been interesting with this is it's middle income and low income as a FAFSA increase.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So there are really interesting. I was talking with some students earlier about some interesting parts of this Promise program where there's a mentorship component. They're trying to do that kind of intensive advising piece where they've got volunteers texting the students, reminding them. Each volunteer has about 5 to 7 students that they're kind of on to fill out this stuff. So they're really kind of pulling in a lot of stuff that we've seen in higher ed that we might think helps. They're trying to do a lot of those elements with this program. So I think that's one to certainly pay attention to in the coming years. So I want to talk a little bit about accelerating these courses. I thought before talking about the high school side of this, I would talk about where this kind of got started, and it got started at the post-secondary level. So in some prior work that I had done in Tennessee, doing kind of an evaluation of these efforts to streamline or accelerate remediation, I looked at these 3 different colleges that all did something slightly different when it came to accelerating their remedial programs. And I was trying to adequately create a comparison group to see how did this change things when the college adopted a new model of remedial math. And so the 3 colleges that I looked at were Austin P, which is a 4-year college, and they adopted the co-requisite model, or we call this mainstreaming, where they basically eliminated developmental math and they just put everybody in college level and had an outside workshop. So that was one institution. The other one was Jackson State Community College. They took their math sequence, divided it up into kind of these modules, 12 different modules, and students had to take some modules and not others depending on what their interests were, their academic interests, and so they basically kind of created this set of modules that then shortened it because you didn't have to do all of them. You could demonstrate some knowledge in some of them. So that was their effort. And Cleveland State is the one I will focus on today. Cleveland State and another community college in Nashville, Chattanooga State Community College, they both were the developers or sort of the early adopters of this SAILS curriculum, which is the math curriculum I'm going to talk about. So what this is it's essentially modules plus acceleration. So they took multiple levels of math and put it into one semester, first of all. And then they divided it up into 5 modules so that the students would move systematically through these 5 modules at their own pace. As soon as you complete one module, you go on to the next. If the person sitting next to you is 2 modules behind you, that's not a problem. The teacher is just walking around, or the faculty member is walking around and helping people as they get stuck, but it's very, very dramatically different format. But this is where that program started, was at these 2 colleges. And in a prior study I had done, I looked at Cleveland State's program to see what impact is this having on college students themselves. Here are the 5 modules, if you're curious what students in Tennessee learn when it comes to developmental math. It's very basic with real numbers, moves into algebraic expressions, graphs, equations, and modeling and critical thinking. So you have to go through them in order.
Angela, I'm confused because usually in California we have like 4 levels of remediation. So when you talk about this, so where are we in that spectrum?
Yes, they took so they had 3 levels and they took all 3 into this.
Wow.
So the lowest level, which was basically module 1, you'd spend an entire semester on like whole numbers, fractions, basic math, pretty basic math. Even that was just pulled right into this. So all 3 levels went into one semester. And then and say you needed a lot of remedial work in some of these basic skills, you could just take a really long time to get through module 1. So they were allowing students that you had a lot of time. There was no limit on how much time you could take, but it was all condensed down to this one, and it's heavily computer assisted. So it's all done on the computer. And again, the faculty members just walking around and offering to help people that get stuck. And this is the same model that we're going to put into the high schools. This is the same set of modules. Everything's the same that they're going to put now into 12th grade. You take a test at the end of each module. You have to pass the test before you can move on to the next module. And so the teacher, the faculty member has to enter in a code so that you can't just keep taking the test every single hour. You can't just skip everything and go to the test. They have to enter in a code, and they have to believe that you're actually like trying to repeat it and learn it. And there's no test at the end. So if you pass the 5th module, you are done with the program. You pass the course. So in this prior work, I'm just going to kind of really quickly go through this. I was interested in if at Cleveland State, the move to this, how did this improve outcomes for students? Did students persist at higher rates? Did they go on and get more credits? What impact did this have? So I tried to basically compare Cleveland State to the other 2-year colleges in Tennessee, as well as compare Cleveland State both before and after it switched its policy. They did this in 2008. And so I had data from 2006 and 7 and compared it to 2008, 9, 10, 11 to see if it made any difference here. Here's the placement policy. You get ACTs out of 36 points. These were their 3 levels. So there's college level, and then those were the 3 developmental levels, and there's the ACT math breakdown. So you can be placed into these, and they adhere to it pretty strictly. Again, almost everyone has an ACT score because if you went to high school in Tennessee, you have an ACT score. And so I used a regression discontinuity exploring the differences between those bars on students on either side. You can see they follow it pretty closely. Actually, that's my next slide. The data comes from Tennessee. It comes from a lot of different people, mostly because I'm now talking about the high schools. When I was doing this with the colleges, it was much easier because the colleges have data and it exists at the higher ed commission level, and it was right there. When you talk about the high schools, that involves a lot of relationship building to bring those data sets together. So from the Tennessee Higher Ed Commission, I got some descriptive data. From the Tennessee Department of Ed, I had to get different data on high school kids. The Board of Regents is the only place where you can get course level data to actually see the transcripts of students. And then the sales program data comes from the sales program itself. So I'll talk about that program in just a minute. So anyway, the data comes from a lot of places, which is, you know, been half the battle on this work, right? Because it has to be coming together.
It's in 4 places, not in 120.
That's so right. So maybe it's not that bad, right? I was just working with someone in Arizona, and it's in a million places there, and I was like, I think this is not going to work. I don't think this is going to work. They follow the score placement rules pretty closely. So you can see here that this is the ACT score in math when it comes to math. And you can see the vast majority of colleges are following the rules. So you only see a few people being misplaced or, you know, other things going on there, but we would think this is actually pretty good. This doesn't look too messy. People are, if you're 17, 18, you're going into, you're being at least recommended to enroll in those courses. And then at those colleges I mentioned before, we do see evidence of this discontinuity. So you can see the breaks right up until the score, where to the left is the developmental math placement, and to the right is the college level placement, and it looks pretty sharp actually, all things considered, for these colleges. So the strategy here was to use a regression discontinuity design. It is fuzzy because not all students are complying with this policy, but I'm basically using your assignment as the instrument for enrollment in the program. And so it's a typical kind of RD model where I was calculating sort of an optimal bandwidth around either side of that cutoff. And then I had a bunch of outcomes. When I first did this study, I just had kind of short-term outcomes, and then after several years, could now look at graduation rates and persistence because it was in 2008, so we can now look at data from like 2011 and 12 to be able to say something about whether or not this impacted completion. Also, though, I can control for the fact that I might think that Cleveland State could be compared to its other two-year colleges in the state. So I sort of compared Cleveland State to the other colleges that didn't do anything at the same time. And then did this sort of before and after comparison with Cleveland State versus the other two-year colleges. So the first difference is students assigned to Cleveland State, or both before and after the policy change within that same institution. And then the second difference is all other students at two-year colleges in Tennessee compared to Cleveland State. And so I have this sort of difference in differences model, very basic difference in differences model where I'm just comparing the kids at Cleveland State to the other kids across the state. So at Cleveland State, and again, the reason I'm talking about this is it's the same model as what we're seeing in the high schools. So some of the outcomes that I had looked at here were just the total number of credits that students completed, the number of college level credits. This is what we really care about because this is what helps you earn a degree, is the college level credits. And then I can look at if they completed any degree or certificate within 3 years. I actually could look within 4 years. And again, these are AAs. This is a community college. So two-year degrees if you're going full-time. And so here you can see that there looks like there's some positive impact. So students assigned to developmental education broadly had sort of negative effects here on being assigned to developmental education. But if we look at this compared to the students who were attending Cleveland State after the fact that this policy changed, it looks like those trends sort of reverse a bit. These are not big magnitude changes, but it does look like for those students, there seems to be a positive impact of moving to a system like this. Now, this is only the case for students at the margins of needing remediation. So this is not able to answer the question of whether or not really low scoring students were negatively impacted by this. It's really looking only at the margins. But there's some suggestive evidence that maybe a move like this was on balance a little bit positive. It was positive for the students at the institution. I saw similar things for Austin P, which did the COREC model, and then I saw negative impacts at Jackson State. Anecdotal evidence and like talking with folks at Jackson State, that was where students could choose which modules they needed for what their major was. That was very confusing to people, very confusing. And students were not sure what was going on. The faculty weren't really sure. This was a very difficult implementation for them. So that could be what was happening here, is a lot of just confusion around switching this policy very quickly. But I also did, what I was interested in with Cleveland State was looking at the differences by group. So these are students recommended for Developmental Algebra 2, and these are students recommended for Developmental Algebra 1. So these are the lower scoring students here. Oh, actually, this is Austin P. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip this one. This is Cleveland State. So these are the Developmental Algebra 2, Developmental Algebra 1, and Remedial Math. So this is what your ACT score was predicting here and placing you into. And it looks like there's some kind of null, when I do a difference in differences analysis here, null if not a little bit positive impact on persistence for these students. It didn't hold through to a degree. But if you look here at the bottom level, this recommended for remedial arithmetic, it might suggest that when comparing low-scoring students across the state of Tennessee, that maybe this move to the shrunk one-class quick modules thing may have actually been leading to, this suggests this might have had some negative impacts on that group of students. Again, this is just one campus and it's looking at it in its kind of pilot years. So that, I would caution against that, right? Because they might have been getting up and running. But it did seem to be some differences between the students' incoming ability in terms of how they were impacted by this policy. So basically there seem to be some differences. I would caution on the RD results because it's just looking at students at the margin. The question I'm now interested in Tennessee is how this affects high school students' outcomes when we move towards the same course, actually taking it into high school. So this is the sales program in high school. They take the ACT in 11th grade. Now in Tennessee, this nicely lines up because in 2010, they started requiring 4 years of high school math. They previously didn't in Tennessee. So now you have to take something in math when you're a senior. And so if you score below a 19, as they're scaling this up, in certain high schools, you'll take sales. And if you score above a 19, you take some other high school math course. And then your freshman year of college, if you complete sales in high school, you do not have to take it in college. You get a certificate. It's going to be logged into a data set so that the colleges would know, okay, that person's already met that requirement. You just have to finish the 5 modules before you leave high school. That's kind of the requirement here.
Angela?
Yeah?
How did the math faculty in the high schools reacted? Because this is a program that was designed for college level. Even though it's the same content, there might have been some issues.
My sense from this, and we're actually kind of doing a deeper analysis of this right now, which I'll talk about a little at the end, but my sense from this is that the high schools were a little nervous. This is very different for a high school teacher to teach in this way. It required technology, sometimes technology the school didn't have, so they had to like buy these mobile computer labs. This was a challenge for some faculty to use that and like be expected to just rely on that all of a sudden. They did have the people from Cleveland State fan out for the pilot year to the high schools and have sort of faculty to teacher conversations. So much to their credit, I think they thought about how can we help you do this. So they had like little professional development sessions to try to teach them. But I do early on, I think there was some skepticism about this. Now the word from a lot of these sales teachers is that they love this. They think it's wonderful. They're very loyal to it. They think all students should take something like this. So, and again, that's just anecdotal, like talking to teachers. That's generally, they're pretty positive about it. So they piloted this program in 2012-13. It was pretty small. So they just did 18 high schools around the Cleveland State area and also Chattanooga. Kind of those are near each other. They did kind of 18 high schools around there. They had about a little over 500 students that were in these schools. This has since expanded. This year they're serving 13,000 students. There are about 30,000 students in Tennessee that would technically qualify for this program. They will scale it even further next year. I think they're getting over 15,000 by next year. They would like to see this hit all 30,000 of those students, but it requires a lot of a lot of money because you have to buy computers and all of this. So that's happening. It continues to scale up each year. If a student is below a 19, they enroll in called bridge math. And this was what the Tennessee Department of Ed developed as kind of the senior level math course if you were below a 19. It's very traditional. It kind of covers some similar concepts as sales, but it's like the teacher talking to the class. It looks nothing like the sales classroom experience, but it has some of the similar content, not entirely, but somewhat. So you have students with scores below a 19, some are in bridge, some are in sales. It's computer-based, it's the exact same course, it's very new for the high schools. So it's got a lot of attention. Inside Higher Ed writes about this program periodically. A lot of other states are curious about this, and they think this looks like a model. Colorado is adopting something like this. So there is efforts. We see 8 states that are now moving to offering something like this. They call it transition curricula, and it's basically the college curriculum, remedial albeit, at the high school level. And so other states are exploring some of this. And then there's some folks at CCRC at Teachers College wrote a really good report where they did this kind of nationwide survey of this. And you see a lot of like more local district relationships. I don't know if LA has something like this, but you see like a community college district partner with the high schools in that area and do something similar to this. And California has an example being an early start program. So the research question here, does enrolling in sales during the senior year of high school result in higher rates of graduation from high school and college attendance compared to taking bridge math, for example? And then again, we see any differences by subgroup. So the sample for the pilot cohort is pretty small. It's about 530 students. We can compare those to at sales high schools, at those 18 high schools. Those were all the kids that were non-sales students. So those were the same high school senior kids at the same high schools, but who were not assigned to sales. The class of the following cohort, there were 8,000 students. This is the cohort I really want to look at. This data is still being matched in this cohort to the higher ed outcomes. We don't actually have that yet. It's March. I thought that happened sort of in the first semester, but it happens right around now. So I'm sad that I'm not able to sort of talk about their college going quite yet for the big cohort, because I'm very curious about this sort of bigger number. after they'd had a year to kind of work out the kinks. And that was in 124 high schools. They're now in about 150 high schools. So they're inching their way up. Here's for the pilot cohort. This is just looking at sales versus non-sales to see who was getting assigned to sales. Sales in the pilot was not random. We have a lot of worries that the principal and teacher was saying, we're going to do something kind of different here. You seem like a go-getter. I'm going to put you in there and you're going to go into bridge math. So I have some serious concerns around that, that who got assigned to sales, right? But you can see if you compare all students, sales versus non-sales, the college going rates here, a little bit different, not that dramatic. If you isolate it to just students closer to who would actually be in sales, you can see that the sales kids are enrolling in college at much higher rates, enrolling in 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges at higher rates. We can't compare these groups though. So this is not saying sales did this because we have a lot of concerns about who got put into sales. But this is what we wanted. What I want to do is compare those groups, right? So I have to find some other way to do that and to be able to compare across those students. So what we can do here is to look at a regression discontinuity design that would first of all just compare the students that were assigned to sales to their peers that were right above the sales cutoff. So this is one way. It doesn't get at the sales versus bridge comparison, but I guess this would at least tell us something about students kind of with similar remedial needs, the impact of taking this versus your traditional high school math class, whatever that might be. And so we could then look at a bunch of things we would care about, right? Do they actually graduate from high school? Are they more successful? Again, where I want to do this RD is on the big cohort. I'm a little bit underpowered with this pilot. So I'm unfortunately just able to kind of talk about this pilot cohort at this point when it comes to college going outcomes. But I do treat this like a fuzzy regression discontinuity. In terms of enrolling in any college, comparing the kids that were in sales to the kids right above the sales cutoffs, it didn't look like there was any real impact of enrolling in college, not a statistically significant one. But interestingly, it did have a positive impact on enrolling in a 4-year college. And again, this is a little bit, there's some limitations here in terms of the smaller sample size of sales students. This is just for the pilot. But this same idea is what we will be doing with the larger cohort and looking at some of these college-going outcomes. It is suggestive, though, that maybe when you compare students of similar math ability, enrolling in sales versus whatever else it is you were taking in high school, maybe there is something positive going on. One thing I will tell you about sales, it has a big college-going culture to it. So the teachers talk a lot with the students about, you are ready for college when this is over. All of you are ready to start college just like everyone else. There's a lot of positivity around going to college. And so maybe some of that is at play with this as well. It isn't just about math. There's a lot of talk about going to college.
Angela,
yeah.
Did you partner with any qualitative researchers? Because I think there's so many other interesting questions related to the articulation in particular, having the faculty and the teachers connect.
So I'm so glad you asked this because this is sort of where I want to conclude. This is part of a bigger project, this sales. So this is one of 4 pieces, this kind of quantitative secondary data analysis. This is a part that I am working on right now with my colleague at the Higher Ed Commission in Tennessee, and her name is Emily House. We're kind of doing this piece of this. As a much bigger evaluation of sales, Tom Kane at Harvard Center for Ed Policy Research and I are doing a much bigger evaluation, and part of it is qualitative. And so here's the parts that we're looking at. We are trying to answer this question of by what mechanism does sales work? And our current senior math assignment policy is optimal for students. But to this question, and this is just all the partners that we're involved with to do this bigger project, and it's just getting started now. But to the question here, these are the 4 components of that bigger study. The first one is a student and teacher survey. We just did this with all of the students in sales, and we surveyed bridge students as well, asking them about their experiences, their self-confidence in math, reported, benefits of the math course they were in. Did they like it? Did they not like it? So just kind of typical questions about the student's experience. That went out to several thousand high school kids in Tennessee, so that we have a student survey. We're right now surveying the teachers, and this is asking the teachers questions about their instructional approach, their most effective tactics, resistance to this program, you know, what they feel is the benefit of it, what they think could be changed about it, and then we ask that of non-sales teachers as well. We're surveying all 12th grade math teachers in the state. So we'll see, I don't yet have a response rate on that. We're giving the teachers a little something to answer this, so we'll see what that looks like. The second one is the qualitative piece, and this is all on implementation. So this is all about how did this get up and running in your school. We really tried hard to get schools that have like taken to this and it's a huge success, and other schools where a lot of students don't finish the program. They've struggled a great deal with it, so we're trying to learn from those about like what the teachers and principals' experiences were. This is the one I'm really excited about. This is where we are going to actually look at students' achievement at the end of the sales course. Because there's no standardized test at the end of sales, we don't have a post measure for students, but what we're actually going to do, much to the help of a lot of those partners that we're working with, we're going to re-administer the ACT to the 12th grade math students in Tennessee at the end of the semester, both bridge and sales students and students just above the cutoff. We're just going to re-administer the math portion of this and see if the achievement gains here are actually if we actually are learning more math here, or if this is more a product of just eliminating the barrier. If all this is about is taking away the remedial barrier, then we have a very different story to tell here, right? Or is this because people learned a certain amount of math that enables them to be more successful in math courses once they get to college? I think that is a very interesting question when it comes to this kind of work. And then this is the part I'm working on with Emily House, where we're looking at just the post-secondary data systems, tracking students, looking at above and below the cutoffs, and trying to do some of that work. So this is kind of the yet to be determined. This is the plea to, you know, bring me back in 2 years. I'd love to tell you about sales, college going with the sales program. But yeah, I'd love to. I don't even know if we have any time left here, but if you have any comments or questions, thoughts about this research, I would really benefit from hearing it. So thank you. Yeah.
I think the creation of the college-going culture could be really important.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of like high-performing charter schools see really high enrollment rates, but then the students, or acceptance rates, but then the students never actually enroll, and they attribute it to the college-going culture.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, because I think that's something I've learned only as I've gone along. Like, everyone's talking about college in here. Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
Hi. To build on that question, I have two questions. One is, if most of the instruction is being done through computers, how is the college culture being developed? And then the second one is, how much does it cost?
Great question. So for the first question about the college culture, I think it's mostly messages from the teacher. I think this is the teacher repeatedly talking about how ready for college you're going to be, and that that's not true in bridge classes. I don't know universally that that's not true, but I do know the sales teachers spend a lot of time saying like, this is great because you're going to be one step ahead. You'll start just with everybody else. So that's what I mean.
So I just want to make sure that I understood what sales is about. What I understood was there was 5 modules. That all computerized.
That's right.
And then all the instructor does is just walk around.
Yeah.
So that's why I was curious.
Got it.
Yeah, like is it informally, like the instructor stops by and says, oh, Estella, you know, if you finish this module, you know, you'll be able to go on to, I don't know, Chattanooga.
Yeah. I think it's both. So I've been in a lot of these sales classrooms where the teacher will say at the beginning, like, okay, let's all get started because we have only got 4 weeks left and we want to make sure everybody's ready to go to college. You know, that's kind of how they'll start the class. But I think it's happening a lot more in the way you suggest, which is like, look, you're almost done, you know, kind of one-on-one encouraging students to finish their last module.
And then the cost?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't actually know. That's a very good question. I don't know the cost per student to do this. I should know that. I don't know what the cost is per student. It depends a lot on the school, the infrastructure at the school. I do know that. So some schools were ready to move to this and had the computers, and then others, there was a lot of investment that had to go into that school. So I think the variation in terms of getting this up and running has been really wide. But I'm sure that the folks in Tennessee could come up with an estimate of per student.
Related to that, though, more important than the cost of the infrastructure, which is time, is the continuing cost.
That's right.
So is the teacher in the classroom a certificated teacher who also teaches math, who's a math teacher?
Yep.
And are there the same number of children in the classroom as in a non-sales class or a traditional math class, or are there more or less teachers?
So the teachers are the same. Those teachers usually teach a sales class plus something else, other things. Right. And then the size of the class, my sense is that sometimes the non-sales classes can be slightly bigger. The sales classes are severely limited by the computers. And so the classes, there's usually about 30.
And a student takes this in lieu of an alternative math class?
That's right.
So really, once you've got the computers, the cost is zero.
Right.
You're just putting students in a different math class.
That's right. No, that's right. Yeah, so you're right.
So
the one
relatively low cost if the class size is about the same. Yeah.
And the software. So they are paying for each student has a login. It cost, per student you have a cost. But that's the number I don't have. Yeah.
Tennessee was going to be a park state, but they're not a park state anymore. Are they an ACT state now?
That's right. They are trying to figure that out, is my sense. They don't know what they are.
Right. Yeah,
that's like right now in the legislature.
Yeah.
Like last week, that was the legislature. So I don't think they know yet.
Is any of the sales curriculum accessible outside of the classroom, or is it classroom bound? And does
Great.
he work on his or her own?
Great question. So yes, the student can work on his or her own. You can't take quizzes or tests at home, but you could log in. The students have a login, and they could do this from home. They could be like working through the lessons and stuff at home, and then but you have to take the test in class because your teacher has to put in a code. So you couldn't cheat on the test or something, but they can do this at home. If they're falling behind, you hear the teacher say like, go home tonight and just spend an hour trying to get enough done so you can take the test tomorrow. So.
What kind of professional development are teachers provided to either onboard them to use the software, and also how to differentiate instruction when they're working with their students? Because if I'm working on module 1 and she's working on module 4.
I think we are going to learn a lot about this from the qualitative work, and that's happening right now. All I know from just the broad, what people have said is that the community college teachers have a training where they come and talk with the high school teachers about what they've learned doing this and how it works best. There's a very key piece I failed to mention here about help on sales. Sales has something called a field coordinator, and these are people whose full-time job is to interface with the high schools on sales, just on sales. So part of the sales budget is for these field coordinators. There are, I think, 17 of them. They are all over the state of Tennessee. They live, they're hired because they live in different parts. And then that person goes around to their rotation of high schools and checks in. And that person has a really good relationship, generally, with the teacher. So that they are the right hand of the teacher. They are able to see when there's a problem happening. A bunch of students are not passing module 3. The field coordinator kind of interfaces with the college and says, like, what do we do? Everyone's stalling out at this particular school. So that's the field coordinator's job. Sales would tell you, the program, that is critical to its success. That without those people, scaling this up would be impossible. Those people are instrumental. For our research purposes, those people are absolutely instrumental because they have the relationships with the teachers.
One more question. It's 1 p.m. almost. One last.
So
no, please.
At the beginning, you mentioned that it's unclear who benefits from these redesigned developmental education. So who do you think benefits from sales?
I don't have that answer yet, and I wish I could come here with that. I think I need the bigger cohort of students where I can look at some differentiation by some subgroups there. It's too hard to say that with that pilot cohort. But that's the real question here. I think the qualitative work coupled with the kind of longitudinal work will help us answer that. Because all I know is having observed a lot of these classrooms, there are students who really take to this. And then there are students who do not. And this is a real struggle for them. that's what we want to know, right? I think that's what the state would love to know, and to think more carefully about, like, is ACT the right assignment mechanism, or is there some other way we should be distributing these students? I think it's a really, that's the question. I think that's the question. Yeah.
On that note,
Yes, thank you very